take an extra minute. So, okay, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about a brand new tool that we have developed at Open Health Network in collaboration with our friends at UCSF and San Francisco VA. And the goal for this tool is really to see if we can bridge a new frontier in what is possible with conversational interfaces. And so we're targeting using chatbots for smoking cessation. And even more specifically, we are building chatbot-enabled motivational interviewing as a smoking cessation tool, and eventually translating into additional fields. So, okay, so we know about smoking. Smoking is not a good thing. But I want to quickly run through the motivation for this. So not only smoking is the greatest cause of preventable morbidity and mortality, and about 480,000 deaths, but smoking is also a health equity issue. It turns out that individuals on a low income, low education spectrum and minorities are not only smoking in greater numbers, but also are disproportionately affected by effects of smoking, because when the consequences do catch up, they have insufficient access to care. So there is a model called the 5 A's that has been proven to be quite effective at helping people reduce smoking and eventually quit. And this 5 A's model is ask, advise, assess, assist with motivation, and quit plan, and eventually arrange a follow-up appointment to make sure that the plan is being followed. Well, it turns out that most providers, being overworked and having 15 minutes to see a patient, when they talk about smoking, they only ask an advice, but they fail to assess readiness for change. They fail to even have a conversation about it. And follow-ups under this model in the wild, in the real world of practice, those kind of follow-ups are almost non-existent. So another model that's ask, advise, refer, it's a simplification. People realize that the 5 A's model is the most effective, but doesn't takes too much resources to do in practice. So this model it ended up being a little bit more efficient, but it still requires PCPs or in-house navigators or counselors. And again, referring to point 2, our target audience is disproportionately poor, low education, and also one of the problems in that population is they have very little time. Frequently, we're talking about people who are working 2 jobs, so asking them to come out and take an hour or 2 of their day to do a physician appointment becomes a non-starter. So out of this ask, advise, refer, came a methodology called motivational interviewing. And it's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy where instead of the therapist being sort of adopting a paternalistic attitude and trying to fix the problems, it really becomes a partnership in compassion and acceptance. And it's a collaborative process that helps the patient internalize the ideas and gradually build acceptance of the need for change. So evidence for motivational interviewing is really high. So we have 5.2 times higher than anti-smoking advice as far as eliciting action. And the action in this particular paper was defined as enrolling in an active smoking cessation program, whether it's medication or support groups. So motivational interview, for those not familiar, there was another motivational interview talk today, so I don't want to be too repetitive. But the basic idea is this, it's a style of counseling that's designed to elicit change talk instead of give change talk. So it's not the provider doesn't tell the patient about what they need to do. The provider helps the patient come back to the change talk. So instead of recommendations, the recommendations for patients come from the patients, and that is one of the reasons it's so effective, because it's immediately internalized. And yeah, there is a lot of acronyms in how this was written, so I grabbed this from the motivational interview manual. So the main principles are open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarization. And when patients are being, where therapists are being trained for this, they go through transcripts. They go first they learn from transcripts, and then when they go and see patients, those interviews are transcribed, and the interviews are marked with open questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarizing. Practitioners are discouraged from giving advice, and eventually, as a practitioner is trained as they go through something like a 6 months training program, they become very adept at applying this methodology with real life patients. So the question then is, how can we train motivational interviewing chatbot? And I'm going to run a little bit forward and say that making a chatbot is easy. We've seen them in many places. Making a chatbot that is good is very, very hard. So I'm going to drill into some of the details of what we did and how we did it. So what if we used AI to bring this kind of motivational interview to everybody? Well, it would solve all of the access to care issues, or not all, but you can get smartphones into everybody's hands, or you can even use plain old text messaging, so it would even work on a flip phone. This is scalable and low cost because compute time is a lot less expensive than therapists. So it would be awesome if it actually worked. So the question is, A, is it technically feasible? Can we actually build motivational interviewing chatbot that is consistent with the MI methodology, that is able to pass muster as an actual therapist, and that brings results? And the next question after that is it actually any good? So is it clinically effective at inducing behavior change? And compared to the standard of care, which is just smoking cessation information, compared to the standard of care, is it more effective? So we sort of predict that it's going to be a little bit less effective than live in-person therapy, but very few people actually get live in-person therapy because of financial and access issues. So we just want to make sure it works better than the status quo. So let me drill. We're going to need to drill into some problems. So the first problem is, how do we recognize change versus sustained talk? So change talk is when a patient talks about reasons for making the change, or tries to identify why it would be a good idea to make the change. So I need to quit smoking, or I think smoking is ruining my life. That is an example of, that's actually a very example of a strong change talk. Strong sustained talk is, I really enjoy smoking. Why should I quit? So how do we have an AI that recognizes change versus sustained talk? That actually turned out to be surprisingly hard. So we started this a few thousand patient interviews, practitioner patient interviews. So as I mentioned before, in the course of practitioner training, the interviews are transcribed and coded. So this data exists, and with the help of our colleagues at UCSF, we actually ran a nationwide data search and obtained about 5,000 transcribed interviews from thousands of practitioners being trained. So we used that to create a custom neural network called TammyBird that it got to about 85% accurate at recognizing change sustained talk with proper valence. When I say valence, is we are doing a 5-point scale. So neutral, weak change, weak sustain, strong sustain, or strong change. So then we had machine-driven tests on this, and eventually we gave it human-driven torture tests. So we would deliberately, we recruited a number of volunteers and had them deliberately try to break it, and accumulated data from them trying to break it, retrained, had the volunteers come back next week and break it again. It took months and many iterations, but we've got it to a place where we are pretty happy with it. So that's problem number one, and there's quite a few more. So therapeutic reflection. So here's again stolen from the training manual. Simple reflections, when you just repeat something back or rephrase it, change an answer into a question. Simple reflections are great. Complex reflections is where the most effective reflections are, and this is an incredibly difficult natural language generation problem. For example, how do you have a robot emphasize the emotional dimension of the conversation? That is a very hard ask for, a soulless piece of silicon. So we ended up building multiple natural language generation tools.
Max?
Yes.
I hate to interrupt you, but we're at the time.
Oh, wow.
And okay. I know it flew by. I want to thank you so much for your presentation.
Can I do one more quickly? Okay, so I just want to show that we have, this is giant stack of custom neural networks. Each one had to be built, and we are currently in a clinical trial.
Great. Thank you.
So we are in the middle of an RCT.
Wonderful. And Max, monitor that chat because I know folks are responding to that. And I want to thank everybody who attended our Innovation Showcase panel today. As you can see, all of these innovators are doing amazing things in the space and are all available for follow-up questions. So please don't be shy in reaching out to them and connecting with them during sessions. And we hope that you're having a great experience this year at AHA 21. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.